It's a Saturday in June. Somebody's backyard, folding table, paper plates going soft under a pile of scrambled eggs. There's a bucket of ice in the corner with green gold bottles sweating in it, and a tall can of Modelo chelada standing next to a plate of orange slices like it belongs there. Somebody says the words every summer host says, "Let's do brunch, but make it michelada." And nobody at that table has ever turned the can around. Nobody has read the alcohol statement, the ingredient line, the tiny print near the bottom that tells you whether the thing in your hand is legally a beer at all. Here's the question. If you're building a whole meal around it, shouldn't you know exactly what it is? If you like knowing exactly what you're serving people, subscribe. We read the labels, the recall notices, and the federal rules so your kitchen runs on documented facts instead of vibes. Stick around, because the strangest part of this story is a lawsuit from 1987. Let's start with why this particular bottle ended up on your brunch table, because it isn't an accident and it isn't just taste. Modelo Especial is not a new product invented for Instagram. Grupo Modelo was founded in Mexico City in 1925, and Modelo Especial as a brand dates to 1966. For decades in the United States, it was a regional thing, the beer you found in a taqueria cooler, not the beer you found in a stadium. Then something shifted. In 2023, Modelo Especial was reported by market trackers as the top-selling beer brand by dollar sales in United States retail, overtaking Bud Light. That's not a small footnote. That's the center of the American beer market moving. So when a recipe channel says summer brunch with Modelo, they're not being random. They're speaking to the beer that's already in your fridge. Here's where millions of people buy it wrong though, and I mean that literally at the shelf. There's not one product here. There are at least 3 families of things wearing the same family name, and they are legally and nutritionally different. There's the flagship pale lager in the clear glass bottle. There's Negra Modelo, the darker Munich-style beer that Grupo Modelo has sold for decades. And then there's the Chelada line, sold in tall single-serve cans, which is a flavored malt beverage-style product built around lime and in several versions, chili and fruit. Constellation Brands, which sells the Modelo brands in the United States, has expanded that Chelada line steadily with flavors like lemon guayzao, tamarindo picante, sandia picante, and pina picante. Now here's the strange part. People grab a chelada thinking it's the same beer with lime squeezed in, and then they build a brunch around it. Sometimes they'll pour a chelada into a glass and then add clamato on top. Sometimes they'll add hot sauce and Worcestershire to a beer that already contains flavoring. You end up double seasoning without knowing it, because you never read what was already in the can. That's the first honest thing I can tell you. The recipe videos almost never say what the base product already contains. They say pour, garnish, serve. Nobody says check the ingredient statement first. And the ingredient statement matters more here than it does with almost any other beverage in your kitchen, for a reason most people find genuinely surprising when they learn it. In the United States, beer is not regulated primarily by the Food and Drug Administration the way your yogurt is. Most beer is regulated by the Alcohol and Tobacco Tax and Trade Bureau, the TTB, an arm of the Treasury Department. And under that framework, a standard malt beverage is not required to carry a full ingredient list or a nutrition facts panel the way a soda is. Read that again, because it's the hinge of this whole video. The can of orange soda next to the beer in the same cooler has more mandatory disclosure on it than the beer does. That's why so much of what people believe about their favorite lager is folklore. Corn or no corn, rice or no rice, preservatives or no preservatives. Enthusiasts argue about it in comment sections for years, and the reason the argument never ends is structural. The mandatory label was never designed to settle it. What brewers do publish, they publish voluntarily or on their own websites. Constellation, for example, publishes nutrition information for its brands. And for Modelo Especial, the company's published figures list roughly 143 calories and about 5 grams of carbohydrate in a 12-ounce serving. That is company-published data, not something anybody in this room measured, and I want to be exact about the difference all the way through. So where does that leave you on a Saturday morning with 8 people coming over? It leaves you with a job, not a hard one. Turn the package around before you plan the menu. Find the alcohol statement because a lower alcohol chelada style can and a full-strength lager are not interchangeable in a recipe that calls for a full bottle. Find whatever ingredient or allergen information the brand chose to print, because some brands print a lot and some print almost nothing, and that difference tells you something about the company before you ever taste it. Find the packaging date or best by code, because with beer, freshness is not a suggestion. And then only then, decide what you're cooking. Because the meal you build around a beverage is only as predictable as the beverage. And in the next act, I'm going to show you exactly what the law says that word beer means, and the loophole that decides whether your can gets a full ingredient list or nothing at all. Here's the part nobody puts in a brunch video, and it's the part that actually protects you. In the United States, the word beer has more than one legal definition, and which one applies changes what the label must tell you. Under the Internal Revenue Code, Section 5052, beer is defined for tax purposes as beer, ale, porter, stout, and other similar fermented beverages of any name or description, containing 0.5% or more of alcohol by volume, brewed or produced from malt, wholly or in part, or from any substitute for malt. That's the tax definition, broad on purpose. Then there's the Federal Alcohol Administration Act, which governs labeling and advertising, and it uses a different term, malt beverage, and its definition is narrower. To be a malt beverage under the FAA Act, the product generally has to be brewed from malted barley with hops or hop products. That's the labeling gate. Why should you care at a brunch table? Because of what falls outside that gate. If a fermented beverage is made without malted barley or without hops, it can fall outside TTB labeling jurisdiction and land under the Food and Drug Administration instead. And FDA rules are the ones you already know from the cereal aisle. A full ingredient list, a nutrition facts panel, major allergen declarations under the Food Allergen Labeling and Consumer Protection Act. TTB and FDA issued guidance on exactly this point, and it's why you'll see certain gluten-free style beers, sorghum-based products, and some hard seltzers carrying a full nutrition panel, while a classic lager next to them carries almost nothing. Same cooler, same shelf, two completely different disclosure regimes. That's the loophole, and it isn't a conspiracy, it's a seam between two agencies written in the 1930s. Now the mandatory items on a standard malt beverage label under 27 CFR Part 7. Brand name, class and type designation, name and address of the bottler or importer, net contents, and for imported products, country of origin under customs rules. Alcohol content is required in some cases and optional in others, and this is where it gets genuinely odd. Historically, federal law actually prohibited stating alcohol content on malt beverage labels, a Prohibition-era hangover designed to stop brewers from competing on strength. The Supreme Court struck that down in 1995 in Reuben v. Coors Brewing Company. A unanimous decision holding the ban violated the First Amendment. That case is the reason you can read the percentage on a can today. Health warning statement. Required since the Alcoholic Beverage Labeling Act of 1988 on every container, phrased exactly as Congress wrote it, covering pregnancy and impairment. Sulfites. If a beverage contains 10 parts per million or more of sulfites, it must be declared. That one matters at brunch, because citrus juice concentrates and certain processing aids are places sulfites show up. If a chelada-style product declares sulfites, that's on the label because the rule made it be there. Certified colors. FD and C Yellow No. 5 has long required specific declaration when used, and TTB has moved toward requiring all certified colors to be named. If a bright red or orange picante flavored can use as a certified color, look for it in the fine print. Allergens. Here's the honest gap. Since a 2006 interim rule, allergen labeling on TTB-regulated alcohol has been voluntary, not mandatory. Voluntary. In 2022, TTB published advance notice of proposed rulemaking looking at requiring an alcohol facts statement, ingredient information, and mandatory allergen labeling across alcohol, a move that followed a February 2022 Treasury Department report on competition in the beer, wine, and spirits markets. And in January 2025, TTB issued proposed rules on alcohol content and nutrition disclosure, and on major food allergen labeling. Proposed, not the same as in force in your store today. So when somebody in a comment section insists their beer legally has to list everything in it, they're describing a world that regulators are still building. One more definition worth having: serving facts. Back in 2013, TTB issued a ruling permitting alcohol producers to voluntarily use a serving facts statement showing calories, carbohydrates, protein, fat, and alcohol content. Voluntary again. So when you see a nutrition-style box on a beer can, understand what you're looking at. Not compliance. A choice. A company deciding you deserve the number. And that choice, brand by brand, is one of the most useful signals on the whole shelf. Not because a company that discloses is automatically better, but because disclosure is checkable and marketing isn't. That's the law. Next, the history that forced these rules into existence, because none of them were written by people being cautious. Every one of them has a story behind it, and some of those stories are ugly. Every rule I just described exists because something went wrong first. That's how food law works. Nobody writes a statute because things are going well. Start in 1906. The Pure Food and Drug Act and the Federal Meat Inspection Act, both signed by Theodore Roosevelt in June of that year, born out of years of documented adulteration reporting and public outrage. That's the foundation everything else sits on. Jump to 1935 and 1936. Prohibition ends in 1933, and Congress passes the Federal Alcohol Administration Act in 1935 to bring order to an industry that had spent 13 years operating in the dark. The labeling framework I described, the class and type rules, the origins of the certificate of label approval process, all of that traces back to that moment. Now the modern ones, and these are the ones with names and numbers attached. The 1988 warning statement law came after decades of advocacy on fetal alcohol effects, and it standardized language nationwide so that the message couldn't be softened state by state. The Food Allergen Labeling and Consumer Protection Act of 2004 came out of documented deaths and hospitalizations from undeclared allergens in packaged food. It took effect January 1, 2006, and it named 8 major allergens. In April 2021, the FASTER Act added sesame as the 9th, effective January 1, 2023. That change rippled through bakery cases and brunch pastry counters everywhere. Here's why that matters for a beer-forward brunch. The beverage might sit under the voluntary regime, but everything you serve next to it does not. Your smoked salmon, your queso fresco, your chorizo, your pastry basket. Those are FDA or USDA products with mandatory disclosure and mandatory recall pathways. And the recall record on classic brunch foods is not gentle. April 2018, Rose Acre Farms recalled more than 200 million shell eggs distributed to 9 states after a Salmonella Brinderup outbreak investigation. The FDA recall notice documented the scale. 200 million eggs. That's a scrambled egg brunch in every direction. September 2011, Jensen Farms cantaloupe from Holly, Colorado, linked to a Listeria monocytogenes outbreak that the CDC ultimately associated with dozens of deaths across multiple states, one of the deadliest foodborne outbreaks in modern American history. Cantaloupe, fruit plate food. The FDA investigation pointed to conditions in the packing facility, including equipment that was difficult to clean. Late 2023, a multi-state Salmonella outbreak tied to whole and pre-cut cantaloupe under brands including Malachita and Ruddy, with recalls announced through FDA notices in November and December of that year, and illnesses reported across dozens of states and in Canada. July through September 2024, Boar's Head recalled liverwurst and then expanded to roughly 7 million pounds of ready-to-eat meat and poultry products after a Listeria outbreak that the CDC linked to multiple deaths. USDA's Food Safety and Inspection Service published the recall notices, and the company announced it was permanently closing the Jarrett, Virginia plant involved. Deli meat, charcuterie board food, brunch food. I'm listing these not to scare you off a fruit plate. I'm listing them because they show you where the enforcement teeth actually are. Fresh produce and ready-to-eat protein are the high-risk lanes, and they are the lanes with the strongest public recall infrastructure. You can look up every one of those notices right now. Beer, by comparison, has a very thin public recall record, and that's mostly a function of the product. Alcohol, low pH, hop compounds, and pasteurization or sterile filtration make a finished lager a hostile place for the organisms that cause outbreaks. The documented beer recalls that do happen tend to be physical, not microbial. Glass, packaging integrity, foreign material. In early 2019, Constellation Brands confirmed a limited recall of certain Corona Extra bottled products over concerns about small particles of glass, reported widely in the trade and general press at the time, with the company describing it as affecting a limited quantity of specific packs. Accounts of the exact scope vary between outlets, so I'll leave it there and let the primary notice speak for itself. That's the pattern across the industry, not a Modelo-specific story. And there's a whole separate history around Clamato-style mixers, because a michelada is often part tomato clam beverage. Clamato is made by Mott's, a Keurig Dr. Pepper brand, and it carries a full FDA-style label because it's a food product, not an alcoholic one. That means a full ingredient list. Tomato juice from concentrate, high fructose corn syrup in the classic formulation, dried clam broth, monosodium glutamate spices, shellfish. That's a declared allergen consideration sitting right in the middle of your brunch cocktail. And it's disclosed only because the mixer falls under the stricter regime. So here's the uncomfortable symmetry. The most transparent thing in your michelada is probably the tomato juice. The least transparent thing is the beer. Next, I'll turn that into something you can actually do at the shelf, in about 11 seconds per package. All right, package in hand. Here's the order I'd read it in, and this works on any brand in any cooler in any country with a modern labeling regime. Brand agnostic, top to bottom. 1. The class and type designation. Not the brand name, the legal descriptor. Beer, ale, malt beverage, flavored malt beverage. Beer with natural flavors. That phrase is doing legal work. A product described as a beer with natural flavor and a product described simply as a beer are not built the same way, and the descriptor is the first honest word on the package. 2. Alcohol by volume. Write it down mentally, because it changes your recipe math and your hosting math. Standard drink in the United States is defined in the dietary guidelines as 0.6 fluid ounces of pure alcohol, which works out to about 12 ounces of regular beer at around 5%. A 24-ounce single serve can, at even a modest percentage, can be more than one standard drink in one container. People routinely count a can as a drink. The label disagrees. 3. Net contents. Look for the number of fluid ounces, not the shape of the can. Tall cans in this category run 16, 24, and 32 ounces depending on the product and the market. The visual difference between 16 and 24 in your hand is smaller than you think. 4. The allergen or contain statement, if there is one. Remember, on alcohol this is currently voluntary in the US, so absence proves nothing. Presence is a gift. If a brand voluntarily prints contains barley or contains sulfites, take it seriously and note that this brand chose to tell you. 5. Sulfite declaration. Mandatory at 10 parts per million or more. On flavored products with citrus concentrate, actively look for it. 6. Certified color names. Yellow number 5 in particular has its own declaration history. On brightly colored fruit and chili products, look. 7. Bottler, brewer or importer name and address. This is the single most underrated line on any label. It tells you where accountability physically lives. Imported by, brewed by, and produced by are different statements. Imported by means the company on the label is the responsible importer, and the beer was made elsewhere. Brewed and bottled by is the strongest claim of origin control. 8. Country of origin. On imported beer this appears because customs rules require it. If a brand markets itself with a national identity, this line either backs that up or quietly doesn't. 9. The date code. And here's the inspector's trick. Beer date codes are wildly inconsistent because there's no federal mandate for them on malt beverages. Some brands print a Best By, some print a packaged on date, some print a Julian code, 3 digits for the day of the year plus a digit for the year. Some print nothing readable at all. Learn to spot the difference between a Best By and a Born On because they mean opposite things. Best By counts forward. Born On counts backward from today. A Born On date from 5 months ago on a light lager is a different purchase than a Best By 5 months out. 10. The container material and glass color. This is a label read that isn't in words. Clear glass and green glass transmit far more of the light wavelengths that trigger the reaction brewers call light struck. Brown glass blocks more. Aluminum blocks all of it. If a product you love comes in clear glass, that's not a defect. It's a brand decision made a long time ago, and it just means storage discipline matters more for you than for the person buying cans. 11. The voluntary serving facts box, if present. Calories, carbs, and often alcohol per serving. If it's there because the company opted in under the 2013 TTB ruling. 12. Anything that reads like a health or dietary claim. Light, low carb, gluten reduced. TTB has specific policy here, and it's stricter than people assume. For products fermented from gluten-containing grains and then treated, the agency's position has been that they cannot simply be called gluten-free. The wording gets long and awkward on purpose, describing that the product was processed or crafted to remove gluten, and that the gluten content cannot be verified. Awkward wording on a label is often a sign the regulation worked. Now the mixer side of the brunch, because the same discipline applies to what you pour in. On a mixer, you get the full FDA label, so use it. Ingredients in descending order by weight. If a sweetener appears before the tomato or the lime, that's a syrup with flavor in it. Check for added salt, because a michelada base plus a salted rim plus salty food is a sodium stack most people never add up. Check whether lime is juice from concentrate, or flavor. Those 3 words describe 3 different products at 3 different costs. And one last rule I'd hang on the fridge. If a claim on the front is checkable on the back, check it. If it isn't checkable anywhere, treat it as decoration. That's the inspection. Next, the strangest documented episode this category ever produced, and it didn't come from a brewery at all. Now the strangest documented case in this whole category. It isn't a recall. It isn't a contamination event. It's a rumor, and it did more measurable commercial damage than most actual product failures ever do. Summer of 1987. Mexican imported lager is exploding in popularity in the United States. Clear bottles, lime wedge, beach imagery. Domestic beer's share is under pressure for the first time in a generation. And then a story starts moving through bars and offices in the American West. The claim is that a leading Mexican import is contaminated, that the brewery's sanitation is compromised, that what's in the bottle isn't only beer. It's crude, it's vivid, and it spreads exactly the way those stories always spread. Friend of a friend, somebody who works at a lab, somebody's cousin who saw the test results. There were no test results, there was no lab. What there was, according to the litigation that followed and the extensive contemporaneous press coverage in outlets including the Wall Street Journal, was a competing distributor. Barton Beers, the Chicago-based importer that handled the brand in much of the western United States, filed suit in 1987 against Luce & Son, a Reno, Nevada beer distributor, alleging the rumor had been spread through its channels. The case settled. As part of the resolution, the defendant issued a public statement acknowledging there was no evidence the beer was contaminated. The brand's own testing and the state authorities involved found nothing supporting the claim. The damage was already done. Sales in the affected Western markets reportedly dropped sharply in the weeks the rumor peaked, with figures cited in the press at the time indicating steep double-digit declines in some areas. The importer spent heavily on advertising and public statements to counter it. And the brand recovered, obviously. Decades later, it's one of the best-known beers on Earth. But sit with the mechanics for a second, because they're the point. A product with essentially nothing wrong with it lost a chunk of a national market in a few weeks, on the strength of a story that had zero documentation behind it. Meanwhile, in the same era, actual documented outbreaks in other food categories moved consumer behavior far less, because nobody told them as a story. They were published as notices. Notices don't spread. Stories do. There's a second, quieter reason this case belongs in a video about brunch. It's about clear glass. The rumor was plausible to people partly because the beer is visible. You can see the color. You can see the clarity. You can see sediment if there is any, and sometimes in a light struck or badly stored bottle you can perceive a difference. Clear glass makes a beer feel inspectable, and paradoxically, that makes it more vulnerable to accusation. A brown bottle hides everything. A clear bottle invites judgment, including uninformed judgment. And there's a real documented chemistry issue with clear and green glass that has nothing to do with rumors. When beer is exposed to light in roughly the ultraviolet and blue range, riboflavin in the beer drives a photochemical reaction with hop-derived isoalpha acids. The product of that reaction is a thiol compound, 3-methyl-2-butene-1-thiol, and it's detectable by human beings at extraordinarily low concentrations. Brewers call it light-struck. Everyone else calls it skunky. It is not spoilage in a safety sense. It's a flavor change, and it's fast. Documented brewing science shows meaningful development in minutes of direct sunlight through clear glass. Which means that if you take clear-bottled lager out of the fridge at 10 in the morning and set the bucket in direct summer sun on a patio table for the whole brunch, you are running that reaction in real time. Not because the brewery failed, because you left it in the sun. This is the practical inheritance of that 1987 story. People blame the product for what the supply chain and the host did to it. A beer that sat in a hot truck, then under store lights in a clear bottle on an unrefrigerated display, then in your sunny kitchen window, is a different sensory product than the one that shipped. No label on earth discloses that history to you. So the strangest case in this category turns out to be a lesson about custody. Who had the product, at what temperature, under what light, for how long? And the closest thing you have to a custody record is the date code and where you found it in the store. Cold case beer over warm shelf beer. Cans or brown glass over clear if it's been sitting out. Back of the shelf over front, because front stock has been under the lights longest. That's the strange one. Next, the money, because the reason cheap versions of anything exist is never mysterious once you see the input costs. Let's follow the money, because once you understand the cost structure, the shelf makes sense in a way marketing never will. A can of beer on an American shelf is roughly 4 cost stacks: liquid, package, freight and cold chain, tax and margin. And the liquid honestly is often the smallest one. Start with the grain. Malted barley is the traditional base. It's expensive relative to alternatives, it requires malting, and malting is an energy-intensive step. Adjuncts, which is the industry word for fermentable ingredients other than malted barley, are cheaper. Corn in the form of grits or syrup. Rice. In Mexican brewing, corn has a long documented tradition going back to Austrian and German brewers working with local grain in the 19th century. And it's not a cheat, it's a house style. Corn and rice lighten body and color and produce that crisp, dry finish people associate with a cold lager on a hot day. But here's the thing you can verify. Constellation publishes ingredient information for the Modelo brands, and the published listing for Modelo Especial describes water, malted barley, non-malted cereals, hops, yeast, and an antioxidant. Ascorbic acid is what's commonly listed there. That's the company's own published information, not anybody's analysis, and I want that attribution clean. Non-malted cereals is the phrase. That's the adjunct, disclosed voluntarily by choice, in a regime that doesn't require it. That single line answers a decade of comment section arguments, and almost nobody reads it. Now the package. This is where the real money moves. Aluminum is a globally traded commodity, and in March 2018 the United States imposed Section 232 tariffs of 10% on imported aluminum, later modified across administrations. Cans got more expensive. Glass has its own economics, dominated by furnace energy costs and freight weight, because glass is heavy and heavy means fuel. In 2021 and 2022, aluminum can shortages were widely documented across the beverage industry, and smaller producers reported being deprioritized by can makers with minimum order quantities in the truckload range. That pressure has visible consequences. Look at how much of the market moved to slim cans, to 19.2-ounce single-serve, to variety packs. Format innovation is often cost management wearing a marketing costume. Then freight and cold chain. Imported beer carries an ocean or overland leg plus domestic distribution, and in the United States the three-tier system, established state by state after Prohibition's repeal, means a producer generally must sell to a distributor, who sells to a retailer. Each tier takes margin. That structure is why the same product can carry meaningfully different shelf prices across state lines. Then tax. Federal excise tax on beer under current law is $16 per barrel for large brewers on production above 6 million barrels, with reduced rates of $3.5 and $16 per barrel on initial volumes for smaller producers. Structures set by the Craft Beverage Modernization provision that were made permanent in the Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2021. And then state excise taxes stack on top, and they vary enormously. That's before sales tax. So what actually changes inside a cheaper product? Brand agnostically, 3 levers. Grain bill, with more adjunct and less malted barley. Time, because tank time is money and a shorter maturation is cheaper. And hops, because hop compounds are expensive and many mass-market lagers use hop extracts rather than whole cone or pellet hops, which is a legitimate, widely documented practice that also happens to reduce cost and improve consistency. On flavored chelada-style products, the levers are different. Juice from concentrate rather than juice. Natural flavor rather than the actual fruit. Acidulants like citric acid doing the work that lime juice would do. None of that is illegal, none of it is hidden if the brand discloses, and all of it is detectable in the ingredient order if the ingredient list exists. And that's the real economic story here. The cheapest input a company can choose is silence. If the law doesn't require an ingredient list, then printing one is a voluntary cost with no immediate return. Every brand that prints one anyway has decided transparency is worth money. Every brand that doesn't has decided the opposite. When you're standing at the cooler deciding what to serve 8 people at brunch, that's a fair thing to weigh. Not because the silent brand is worse in the glass. It might be excellent. But because you're the one hosting, and the person with the shellfish concern or the sulfite sensitivity is going to ask you what's in it, and you can only answer with what somebody chose to print. Last act, the pantry, what to buy, how to store it, and how long it actually keeps. Here's how I'd actually run a beer-forward summer brunch if I wanted it to be good and I wanted it to be safe. Practical, documented, no mysticism. Storage first, because storage beats brand almost every time. Beer has 3 enemies: light, heat, and oxygen. You can control all 3 at home for free. Light, cans are opaque, full stop. Brown glass blocks a substantial share of the damaging wavelengths. Clear and green glass block very little. So the rule is simple. If your product is in clear glass, it lives in the dark, in the fridge, or in a closed box, and it goes from cold storage into an ice bucket in the shade, not onto a sunny table. If your beer is in cans, you have far more forgiveness, which is exactly why so much of the chelada-style category is canned. Heat. Brewing science on staling is consistent and well documented. The chemical reactions that produce cardboard-like and sherry-like off flavors roughly accelerate with temperature. A case stored in a garage that hits 100 degrees Fahrenheit in July is aging dramatically faster than the same case at 40 degrees in a fridge. There's no exact home number to give you, and I won't pretend there is. Directionally, cold is slow and hot is fast, and that's enough to act on. Oxygen. You don't control this one after purchase, but you do control it by buying fresh. Dissolved oxygen picked up at packaging is a primary driver of staling, and it's why big brewers spend enormous engineering effort keeping it low. Your version of that engineering is checking the date code. So, real shelf life. There's no federal requirement for a date on beer, and there's no legal expiration. What brewers generally publish, and what the industry works to, is a freshness window rather than a safety window. Most mass-market pasteurized lagers are marketed with a best by roughly 6 to 9 months after packaging, with some brands using 180 days as an internal freshness standard and pulling stock after that. Unpasteurized or hop-forward beers are far shorter. High alcohol, dark and bottle-conditioned beers can improve for years. Flavored chelada-style products deserve their own note. Juice, fruit, and citrus components are more fragile than plain lager. Treat those as the shortest-lived thing in the fridge and buy them for the weekend you'll drink them, not for the pantry. Is old beer dangerous? Documented food safety guidance is consistent that the combination of alcohol, low pH hop compounds, and the absence of oxygen makes finished beer an extremely poor environment for the pathogens that cause foodborne illness. Old beer is a quality problem, not typically a safety one. Damaged packaging is a different story. Rust on a consigne, a bulging can, a bottle with a compromised crown, active leakage. Don't argue with those. Discard them. Now the actual brunch build, category level. If you're making a michelada-style drink, decide which of the two things you're making. A chelada traditionally is beer with lime and salt. A michelada adds tomato or clam tomato juice, hot sauce, Worcestershire-style seasoning, sometimes soy, sometimes Maggi. Those are two different sodium loads and two different allergen profiles. Clam tomato mixers put shellfish in the glass. Worcestershire-style sauces classically contain anchovy, which is fish. Soy sauce brings wheat and soy. That's 3 of the 9 major allergens hiding in what looks like a simple drink. Write them down on a card next to the picture. Genuinely, that's the single highest value hosting move in this entire video, and it costs you a pen. Buy fresh limes over bottled if you can, because bottled lime juice frequently contains preservatives like sodium benzoate and sometimes sulfites, all of which will be declared on the label if present. Nothing wrong with them, just know they're there. Food pairing, because that's why you're here. The reason a crisp adjunct lager works with brunch isn't magic. High carbonation scrubs fat off the palate, which is why it works against chorizo, fried eggs, crema, and cheese. Low bitterness means it doesn't fight chili heat the way a heavily hopped beer does. And the dark Munich-style option, with its melanoidin-driven toasty character from darker malts, sits better with mole, black beans, and anything roasted. Stock strategy. Cans for outdoors, glass for the table. Buy the freshest date code you can find and buy from a cold case in summer if the store has one. Keep a backup non-alcoholic option, because the non-alcoholic beer category has genuinely improved and someone at your table will want one. And the sober note, because we deal in documentation. In January 2025, the U.S. Surgeon General issued an advisory on alcohol and cancer risk, calling for updated warning labels. The dietary guidelines for Americans have long advised that adults who choose to drink do so in moderation, defined as up to 2 drinks per day for men and 1 for women, and that some people should not drink at all. That's the published guidance. Serve accordingly. Here's what stays with me. The most photographed thing on that brunch table, the cold bottle in the sun, is the one item legally allowed to tell you the least. Your tomato juice has a full ingredient list because somebody died once and Congress wrote a rule. Your beer doesn't, because of a seam between 2 agencies drawn in the 1930s. Not malice, just history nobody went back and fixed. And the brands that print an ingredient line anyway are choosing to, right now, while the rulemaking crawls along. That's worth noticing at the shelf. If this was useful, subscribe, because we do this every week with a different aisle. And tell me in the comments which subject you want next. Olive oil grading, honey adulteration, canned tuna codes, deli meat labels. Pick one and I'll go read every notice I can find.